Afternoon. It is August the 25th, the doggest days of summer coming up. Labor Day, the relief of Labor Day and no longer having to wear a white is, for those of you on the East Coast, is coming up shortly. I'm Matthew Holt. This is the THCB Gang, a weekly roundup of what's going on in healthcare with a few special guests sprinkled in. We have some special guests today. So who am I lining up today? We have regulars John Neptune from Suntra Modern Recovery, the Is It Serious podcast, our friend Jennifer Benz from Benz. And our two guests today, one of them is become a kind of fairly regular guest, is Jen Goldsack, who's the CEO of the Digital Medical Society. And our brand new guest today is Ryan Vega, who is, I think we can call him the CIO of the VA, Veterans Affairs, but the head of health, innovation and learning, among other things. He has a much longer title. And so, hi, everybody. Good to see you all. Thanks for coming. And we were kidding somewhat before that at least with all the money that the taxpayer spent on the center implantation, Ryan got a very nice background, a Zoom background out of it. But we shall dive into what Ryan is up to in the VA, also what Jen and Ryan have been doing together. Jen Goldsack and Ryan have been doing together. And we will do that as soon as we've done our typical quick go around the horn and ask people what they've been looking at, what has caught their attention in the last couple of weeks. Jen Benz, I'm going to start with you.
Thanks, Matthew. Nice to be back. Nice to see everybody.
Yeah, where have you been? You've been away for weeks. You've been on the beach.
I know.
Been on the
vacation.
Beach.
It's been August. It's been great. So nice to see everyone. Well, that big news about Amazon's Amazon Care and kind of everything that they're doing that came out yesterday. I haven't even had a chance to wrap my head around it and what that means with the One Medical acquisition and so forth. So I'm very curious to hear what everyone has to say about that. And then in my world, it's of course open enrollment time, very exciting for our team, being very busy getting all of the campaigns ready for changes that companies are going to be rolling out this fall. A little bit too soon to say exactly what's going to be going on, but I know inflation is top of mind for companies as they're looking at what to do with healthcare costs and passing on cost increases. And then, of course, the whole conversation around travel benefits and abortion coverage and so forth continues, kind of intermingled with the whole concept of traveling to get better quality of care or care that's not available in your area. So lots of interesting conversations along those lines, and just really eager to hear what everyone else has to say.
Fantastic. JL, what have you been up to?
Again, yeah, I talked about Amazon last time I was on the call, and who would think that I talk about them again? Last time, you may remember, it was a One Medical acquisition, and I very much look forward to talking more about this in this episode. I think what I found fascinating was not just the fact that Amazon is deciding to pull the plug after 3 years, but the reasons that the memo gave. There was a memo that was leaked as to why they were pulling the plug, to me, is the really interesting part of the story. You know, what they said was they weren't able to develop a complete enough product. They had problems with physician licensing, and they had a problem building their own EHR. And if Amazon, one of the titans of American capitalism, can't figure these problems out, for those of us who are trying to solve it at a much smaller scale, I'm heartened by that information. So. And then for Jen, I'd say one thing that I'm looking at, Jen, I'm looking at 15% year-over-year increase in premium. So I'm thinking a lot about health insurance as well.
I've seen some big numbers now. I'm surprised you haven't figured it out, JL. You've been at this for months now.
Hey,
come on.
It got a much longer to go, man.
This is, as JL, one of JL's major investors, possibly only investors, I'm very disappointed to hear that. But I was hoping that Amazon was going to come buy them out and make me some money. But all right, we won't discuss the dubious world of angel investing in your buddy's healthcare ventures. It's like probably better than the other things I did with my money though lately. We won't discuss. On my other show, Health Tech Deals, Jess DeMassa spends most of her time discussing my poor investment record. Anyway, all right. Jen Goldsack, why don't you tell us a bit? First of all, tell us what you've been looking at this week before we dive into what you guys have been up to at Dime.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's hard to avoid the fact we've all been looking at this Amazon Care announcement. And I think the interesting thing to me about that, in addition to what sort of JL shared, is their play was to go to employers, right? Their big play the whole time was to go to the employer market. And I think that we are seeing largely that a lot of virtual first care, telehealth organizations are selling their, in some cases, unfortunately, point solutions, thinking that employers are the way to dodge having to go third-party reimbursement. And I think it's a bit of a cold shower for the industry. It's not that easy. Employers too demand complete care, high quality care. There are no shortcuts. And I think it is a very important moment here. And JL, to sort of tease out some of the other pieces from the memo, challenges with EHR, but also physician licensing. I mean, frankly, and Matthew, thanks for including us today. One of many reasons we absolutely love working with VA is because some of the systems that they have in place to truly be creative and to be thoughtful and to be driving the tip of the spear without those limitations like physician licensing. So I think a sombering moment for all of us. There are no shortcuts. I think to some extent, I'm going to put my hand up and say, I didn't think there were. I think there are people out there who have believed that and taught themselves into that for a number of years. But the proof is in the pudding here. There is no easy way to do this. We're going to have to collaborate. You can't carve out chunks of the market. It's not going to work. If Amazon can't do it, no one can.
Oh, you're making me so depressed. Right. Before that, we're going to go to the place where, so Ryan, would love you to introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us a little bit about your background. Tell us a little bit about what you do at the VA. And then tell us a little bit about what you've been noticing just in the news the last few weeks or whenever. And I'll point out that I think there was a book written about the VA not so long ago called The Best Care Anywhere. Wasn't that right? I think there was. So maybe that is the answer.
It's on Amazon.
Maybe that's the answer. Maybe that's the
right.
You should buy Amazon anyway.
One day shipping. Look, I'm excited to be here. I'll start with what I'm focused on in terms of looking at the news. Now, I have to give context. I was born and raised in New Orleans and went to LSU for undergrad and medical school. So my biases and what I pay attention to in the news tend to center around what most of us from Louisiana focused on right now, and that's LSU's kicking off in about a week and a half. So we don't know yet who Brian Kelly is going to start. We know that our star running back is out for the first two games. So we're living on the edge of our seat to see how we're going to fare against Florida State. So that's you can tell where my mind is.
Why don't you arrange a game against Columbia? Because that might be the level you're going to be at. Things
that's the guarantee. That's a guaranteed W right there.
That's it, right? And make a decent amount of money for the college, right? So
yes.
Look, I think, and I picked that example for a reason because hopefully this will make a little bit of sense in putting into context the way that we in the VA think about innovation, but also I think what we're learning about why things are failing in the market. You've seen enormous upending of college football. The landscape has substantially changed with name, image, and likeness, with the consolidation of markets, particularly the SEC, and now we're seeing movement in the Big Ten and the Pac-12. And interestingly, we've seen this in healthcare. I don't know that we've really recognized it. Over the past decade or so, the largest drivers of GDP in American healthcare are not traditional healthcare companies. But there's a simple truth about approaching a football game with a basketball. It's usually not going to work. And it's part of the reason that I think we're starting to see things like Haven and Google and Amazon really struggle because they're approaching healthcare as a market. And it's not. It's never going to look like a general market economy. And that's the opportunity. In fact, if you can reorient the market, if you can tackle innovation from a market perspective, you actually can change the game. And if we do that, and we do that successfully, then I think you can start to see costs come down, care be prioritized about the production of health, not transactional volumes, and say, well, we treated you, and so we'll get paid to treat a heart attack versus incentivizations to prevent those. And that's a benefit that we have in the VA. And so my job, and I like to think it's probably, I'm biased, one of the best jobs in government is leading a large team that works on reimagining not only the future of healthcare, but driving some of that from both a technology, a care and payment standpoint, and really collaborating with just incredible and talented clinicians and administrators all across the US on how we put those solutions in place, all oriented around a single mission. And that mission is to care for veterans, not to provide healthcare. That's a piece of the puzzle. But how are you going to care for these individuals? And while our market pressures are there, they may be political or financial, we are free in a lot of ways to create and invent the best care possible because we have, again, thought about things from that market perspective. We're not focused on getting this solution out there and trying to take it to market and be commercially viable. We're thinking about all the intricacies about the care experience, the journey, the model. What happens before that appointment, during that appointment, and after? How do we build a system that allows continuous health engagement, not just you show up at the doctor, we give you a prescription, and we see you in 3 months? And so I think what you're seeing in the market as all these changes are coming is enormous disruption, but it's a challenge for them to take, again, a basketball and fit it into a football game.
And if I can just riff off that, Ryan, I love that analogy. I think, we've all mentioned, actually, Ryan, you were very gracious and didn't, but the rest of us have mentioned Amazon. But the big investment was in Incredible Health, right? Which is this staffing platform, which is actually thinking about addressing the primary crisis in healthcare right now, which is there isn't a healthcare executive who's not lying awake at night worrying about how to staff their units and their clinics, right? And I think it's, to your point, Ryan, you need to play the game differently. I think it's a really interesting moment where we see Incredible Health and that staffing need and that sort of tactical play pulling ahead. And we see the team that showed up to the football field with a basketball struggling.
So let me try to square this out a little bit, because I did mention, I forgot who wrote the book called The Best Go Anywhere. It was a while ago about the VA, but what it essentially said was the VA is a essentially closed system with more or less cavitation and incentives to keep the population healthy. That's why the hard hats back in the day built Vista, that first electronic medical record system. It worked pretty well for a long time. We won't necessarily, maybe we will get into this, Ryan, the controversy about, what's going with Cerner and the change from that, et cetera, et cetera. But I guess the reason that many of us believed Amazon might come into healthcare and make a big splash, and by the way, they haven't left, they just spent $3 billion on a Tony front-end primary care group, which charges $517.40 for a pediatric visit. You wonder why I would know that? My kid has to go back to them for a pediatric visit every quarter, and I have a high deductible health plan, and I've noticed this. I may have to get off that high deductible plan if he has to keep going back to One Medical every quarter. But they bought One Medical. They still have PillPack. They are apparently in the running to buy Signify Health, which does at-home stuff. So they're not going away. But I think the thing that is sort of interesting to me, and I'd love the rest of you to dive in on this, Jen and JL, because you're in this from different parts, as well as Jen and Jennifer and Ryan, is the fact that I kind of believed, I'm not sure how much I believe, I kind of believe that if you could come to American employers and say, I can name your healthcare tune, JL's complaining about his inflation rate at 15%. I can name your healthcare tune in less by doing build it from the ground up, primary care focused, hybrid clinic, with all the bells and whistles for taking care of people, kind of the way that Crossover Health does a little bit for Amazon, the way that Jonathan Bush and Faye Rotenberg talk about Firefly doing. I could come along and I could name that tune, and I can cut out all those expensive hospitals for special surgery that we were talking about earlier, and cut out all those, high cost primary care, unnecessary primary care visits that feed into the big palace on the hill that makes all the money. And I could name the tune with 20 to 30% less. I would amass market share very quickly, and I could scale that up. And a lot of the reason why people like me were saying, well, it's going to be tough for real startups to do that. But Amazon can do it because they've got the capital, they've got the technology expertise, blah, 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 blah. And presumably we thought the dogs would buy the dog food if you did it. And they went relatively quickly to a decent number of employers. I mean, they started off with none and their own, and and they got Hilton Hotels and a bunch of others. And I'm just surprised that they pull the plug on that angle, because converting One Medical into a beast that is going to be cheaper than the market is going to be very hard. So I don't know. Does that mean my entire concept of the fact that, we could do better, faster primary care, hybrid-based primary care and reduce the cost for employers is just bullshit? What do you think, Jen? Jen and Jen, you both have opinions on that.
We're going to be very polite to each other. So, I think it's also interesting, especially if you do read the memo, right? Because what they didn't say was that it was collapsing. What I read between the lines was the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. And I think that that's the piece that I found really interesting. Matthew, to your point, you said, and they come and they have all this capital and they can stay the course and they can overcome the activation energy. At some point, they just said, in fact, at some point yesterday, no, we're going to go and do other things. We're going to keep digging in on Signify. We're going to, PillPack's working great for us. We've got One Medical now. We have a plan and it's different to this. And it's not that hybrid primary care approach. And so I don't think we should give up, but it's going to take a certain kind of tenacity and likely new incentives, I think, to pull the thread all the way through. But Jen, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point compared to the profitability of some of their other segments that are further along. And that's part of the problem of this healthcare innovation being in a capitalism model where we have to quickly show the profits faster than maybe the impact on health. And we know health outcomes change over very, very long periods of time, but profits are reported quarterly. So I think there's a disconnect there. And I also think that, Matthew, to your point of, if we could just shave 30% off of the healthcare model, wouldn't every employer adopt that instantly? Yes, but it's not quite that easy because the employers are so diverse in where their people live. It's complex in terms of all of the different places that they're being pulled with their benefit strategy right now. And, many of the employers that have the most clout in terms of size also operate in the most number of geographies, which makes scaling anything really, really challenging. And I suspect that how aggressive Amazon Care was trying to be from serving such a big geography, it was part of what was making that model really tough on the profitability side. And Ryan, you're not, yeah.
JL, then Ryan. We'll go to Ryan in a second for JL.
And one other thing, Matthew, as you remembered, I used to run the Blueprint Health Accelerator, small VC firm, and we had almost 80 companies that we invested in that were trying to do something interesting in the digital health world. And I think one of the things that I saw when I was at Blueprint is we probably had about a quarter of the companies in our portfolio that were trying to sell their offering as an employee benefit. And what I discovered was that's actually a very hard thing to do. Like when you're offering a service and you're going to an HR department, first just getting on the menu is very challenging. Okay, Amazon overcame that. But then there's the whole issue of getting employees to engage with the product. And even if the product is a great product, I think that Jen Benz, you can comment on this, many of these services that employers buy may have an uptake that's in the 5% or the 10% range, right? And the uptake and what's happening is you're getting this homogenization. Yes, there are a subset of employees who may really value it and might be willing to pay at a per member per month that's really high, but then you have a whole bunch of other people who are like, maybe I'm not so interested. So I wonder to some extent if the Amazon Care, and I very much agree with the other Jen, that I think that when Amazon Care says this is not interesting, I think they're just not making it's not interesting enough from a financial perspective. And I wonder if a lot of that just comes down to the way they were selling it on either per member per month or per engaged member per month. And again, maybe you have this homogenization that makes it difficult to identify the very interested customers who would be willing to pay you more versus the less interested, less motivated customers who just don't make it worth your while. So that's what I think.
So Ryan, my obvious answer is that if the VA has been operating this world for that long, and okay, maybe I'm lying, maybe there isn't that much appetite amongst American employers, but surely the answer is that the VA should be going out and marketing to employers because you guys know how to do this. I'm only semi-kidding, I'm wondering.
But I think what you're hearing from everyone on the panel is a lack of appreciation for real market variability in healthcare, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you just heard, right? There's too much of a homogeneous approach. I mean, look, if we all started a surfboard company today, our first penetration into the market wouldn't be in Topeka, Kansas, right? We're going to go to the coast. So we don't, and we fail to appreciate that the communities are very complex. I mean, the community that I grew up in New Orleans is not the same as Boston. They're very different. What's so unique about the VA is the breadth and the complexity of veterans all across America and the variability in the markets from Florida to California and Alaska and Hawaii. These are very different places. There's very different expectations. There's very different definitions and permutations of what's valuable to these individuals. And so what's one group going to demand and expect and pay for is likely going to vary very differently market to market. And so this, in my mind, is what we sometimes fail to appreciate when we take these solutions to market, or we try to say, here's a product, it should scale everywhere. We fail to realize where are we actually targeting utilization to have the most immediate impact. That's a much better strategy from seeing more short-term financial returns, but also as utilization then grows, you can see the actual health outcomes. We're a little bit sort of disenfranchised from that idea where we're trying to go to market to make the most immediate return. And I get it, that makes sense. But I kind of go back to the idea of like, healthcare is not a traditional market. You can't operate that way. And I think the proof over the past decade is that's pretty true.
So when you to flip it now and look at internal, I was kind of kidding, a little bit kidding about the VA selling, and we've had conversations on this show and elsewhere with the folks from Kaiser saying, why did Kaiser, which theoretically has the same kind of structure, never make it out of California, Hawaii, and a couple of other small states? Why didn't that go to playing Topeka, Kansas, or Chicago, or New York, or wherever else, when it theoretically should be cheaper, better, faster, more managed, all that kind of good stuff? But flipping it around, you do have the VA, right? You don't have to, well, I don't know how much you have to convince the patients, the members to come join you, but you've got a set population there. You've got a set budget, so you've got incentives to not be doing what most American healthcare does, just spend as much as possible and hope that you can keep charging more. So how do you think of that how do you think about your role in innovation when you see all this stuff going on, whether it's hybrid care or whatever it happens to be, remote patient monitoring? How do you think about scaling that in the VA, and how do you think about trying to get the most bang for the taxpayer buck?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we focus on two core pieces of scale, and Jen will know where I'm going with this. I think this is sort of fundamentally lacking when it comes to healthcare innovation. So we think of scale as sort of market orientation or penetration, right? What percentage of hospitals or percentage of clinics, or how far across the US population is this reaching? That's important. We consider that. But more importantly, I believe, is when and how to scale something. And so we take a lot of time in replicating and understanding the nuances or the implications of a solution, and then putting our money into the change management to scale something when we know that something should be everywhere. Great example is oral care bundles that have been shown to reduce non-ventilator associated pneumonias. We started those actually in our community living facilities for veterans that were there for long periods of time or even living there. We started to see a reduction in nosocomial infections. But interestingly, what we found by using tools such as AI and large databases is that you really don't need to screen people. You just need to implement this at scale, and you're going to see a reduction in morbidity and mortality. But what we did was we really took our time to understand, when is this ready to scale? Meaning that we didn't just presume that because something worked on a particular population, that it was somehow now ready for scale. We're seeing this a lot with AI and digital. We see that the study population, this solution worked really well. And then when we go to scale it, what happened? It didn't work, right? There was a great New York study that came out that looked at AI augmented radiographic reading for chest x-ray. So helping the radiologist diagnose pneumonia. From hospital to hospital, the sensitivity and the specificity drastically changed. And you'll go, well, why? The algorithm's not changing. What changed? So the researchers were clever. The way that the x-rays were taken was different. The way that the radiologist read was different. The patients were different. The IT systems were different. All these things were different. So because something works in one place, not just replicating it, but really understand when something is ready to scale beyond the test population has to be at the forefront of your focus.
All right, so this is the part where I bow to the whims of Jen's PR people, and I know that both Dime and the VA have been working on one of your playbooks together, which I think came out earlier this month. So tell us a bit about, Jen, what those are, and then what did you two figure out together? What was the research you did, and give us a bit of a sort of an overview of the playbook.
Fantastic. So I have people, and this is excellent news. I need to now go.
There's a poor woman called Carla who bugs me by email. Who understand
I'll
this.
talk her later. So that's exactly right. And actually, Ryan sort of teased up a little bit of the backstory to the more recent release of the playbook. And one of many reasons that we so enjoy the privilege of partnering with VA is, you know, Ryan and colleagues have such a thoughtful approach and a measured approach to what does good look like vis-a-vis digital innovation, right? We're not looking for the sort of fast returns that we've just been decrying earlier in our conversation. And I think the question that Ryan asked about, you know, appropriateness of scale, and also following on Jen and JL from your comments, time to value realization. It can be a really, really long play, and the healthcare provider that is patient enough to really think about this is VA, because, you know, what I have learned from Ryan and others is their responsibility for that warfighter from the moment of retirement to the grave. How can we make sure that we've optimized their health for that entire time, whether they move, whether they don't move, whatever they walk in the door with, and whatever they may encounter during the course of their life? And so that gives us an opportunity. So, you know, as we keep those two questions in mind, you know, and as we examine what's the opportunity for digital, what's the risk, what's the benefit, how are we thinking about regulatory as a signal, how are we thinking about in-house capabilities, that's what actually came to crystallize what we released at the beginning of the month in the latest edition of the playbook. So that playbook really brings, and it's, you know, it's 100% slide-based, it's very action-oriented, and it walks through 8 digital solutions, which is a bold claim in and of itself, but it's not widgets. We are actually here looking for solutions from AI and machine learning all the way through to sort of EHR and engagement platforms. Through those 8 tools, what does good look like? What are the risks? What are the benefits? How can we give you case examples of what good looks like? When we articulate a risk like bias in AI, for example, let's give you 1 or 2 tangible things that can actually help support you and make good decisions. It's not intended to be overwhelming. It's not written like a clinical paper, although we could write them all day based on the work that VA does. It really is here to say, look, there's a really thoughtful approach that's been taken at VA. There's enormous progress that's being made. Let us point at tangible examples. Let us be thoughtful about those technologies that are ready for prime time. Some of them include VR and AR, which is just absolutely extraordinary among the veteran population, but we're seeing it more broadly. It's thinking about telehealth. It's thinking about remote patient monitoring. It's thinking about digital therapeutics. And it goes through these in a very sort of manageable and approachable way. And, you know, the pleasure here has been the VA's openness to say, you know, taxpayer funded, of course, let's get this information out there. We work our ass off all day to care for veterans, but there's also a responsibility. And, you know, Ryan, I've learned this from you and I've seen it from the VA team to really make sure that healthcare across the board is benefiting from all this. So Matthew, the playbook on digital healthcare, which is the 2nd edition, we had one previously that we released with industry during the pandemic on digital clinical measures, is really that sort of distilled and essential guide for those people who are awake at night, you know, those healthcare executives who are worried about staffing. They are, 33 of hospitals right now in that recent American Hospital Association report, right, are underwater. Like, these are real problems. How many rural hospitals have we seen close over the last few years? What can we do to prevent more? So it doesn't approach these things like digital as a silver bullet. It takes really seriously the risks, but we did try and dive into it. And I think the case examples there are spectacular. Ryan, is there anything else you want to pile on to that? Because, I mean, it's been incredibly well received and, you know, so proud of it.
No, I think you nailed it. It's really about
there you go.
Practical, the practical applications of these tools. I mean, again, we're fortunate to have the mission that we have and the workforce that we have. But a lot of the same challenges we have are challenges that the private sector and the commercial space are experiencing. Supply, demand, capacity. And so these tools we've really worked very hard to apply to solve very similar challenges. And our hope is that we have a practical guide for how to utilize these to solve some of the same pressing challenges that the commercial and our private sector colleagues are facing.
So if you're listening on the podcast, you won't see this, but if you're watching the video, you will. I just shared the guide. You can find it at on the Digital Medical Society, dimesociety.org thing. It's in their research. I think it's in the research playbooks. Hang on, I have to figure out which part it's in. It's in the projects. Go down and projects. Look for playbooks, and it's down the bottom here. But I want to go. There are 8 separate sections, 8 solutions. So let me read them out for those people who are not watching. AI and ML, electronic health records, AR, VR, and MR. I don't know what MR is. AR is augmented reality, virtual reality, and maybe reality. Mobile health applications, connected sensor technology, engagement in social media, digital therapeutics, and virtual care. So what I'd love the two of you to do is just pick one of those, maybe run pick one, and talk about what have you done in the VA and what's happening in the VA, and how could that be a guidepost, a shining, a path, or an example, whatever, for people who are trying to pick it up. So just pick one of those and tell us, what did you do and what did you learn?
Jen, you want to go?
I'll give an obvious example because I think it's so powerful and it's something we point at often. And this is the virtual care one. And there's a really fantastic program. Ryan, correct me if I'm misspeaking, but I think it came out of the Atlanta VA, although it spread like wildfire. And it's virtual cardiac rehab. And this is one of those things. Is it low-hanging fruit? Sure. But you know what? If it's that low-hanging, why isn't everyone doing it, right? We know the clinical outcomes are, I think it's 80% improved when you get someone into cardiac rehab after an MI. And actually, especially for the VA that do serve all of these different populations. And this, one of the things about VA and actually Ryan's group in innovation in particular is making sure that great innovations diffuse appropriately. And it's the success of Smart Heart and the options that they give veterans. You can still come in and do cardiac rehab if that's what you prefer, but the success of the program, the engagement of that program, the thoughtfulness of that program in meeting the veteran where they are, really understanding the tools and technologies that they have. They can make it work with a flip phone if you need them to, right? It doesn't require this high level of technology. It's about caring for that veteran after a cardiac issue. And I think I like this example. It may not be the obvious one because it's more simple, but the performance has been spectacular and it just bridged that gap. We knew the clinical solution, right? We just had to meet the patient where they were, and that gap has been beautifully bridged. It's been appropriately diffused to the communities of veterans across the country that really need it. That in-person care is still available where it's more appropriate or where it's preferable. And it's really, really an elegant bit of innovation that I think is the gold standard for what good can look like as we think about what is the role of virtual care in the digital era of healthcare.
So Ryan, I'll give it 1 second, Joe. Ryan, how does that, a bunch of people in the VA, a lot of very smart people doing a lot of different stuff in all those hospitals, right? Cross-training with usually academic medical centers as well. How does those innovations kind of, they'll bubble up, some will try something. How does that get sort of categorized, classified, and then diffused by your group? How do you work to do that? And then, I know maybe we can go to the next section. So how do we get it out of the VA if it's that good? But tell us, how does it work within the VA, and then let's talk about getting it out there, other than having Jen write a report about it.
Yeah,
which is not a bad way, but it may not be the only way.
So we have an ecosystem that's been constructed over many, many years because of many, many failures and bad decisions by us, learning what works and what doesn't. But within that ecosystem, there's multiple different on-ramps. We actually have an internal, you can think of it as our internal VC model called Spark Seed Spread, where we actually make investments that are staggered or tiered based upon the level of maturity of the project all across the country to employees based upon their ideas. There's also intakes for practices that are more well-defined. Those go through a Shark Tank mechanism by which individual medical center directors or network directors, CMOs, CEOs are actually allocating capital to bring a specific project to their facility to have help driving replication. So we have all these internal mechanisms that we can use by putting some funding, not a lot, but enough, supporting individuals, but also creating competition. Because you're right, there are hundreds, if not thousands of great ideas and solutions, but they're all not going to scale. You have to create a market. You have to allow for competition, and you have to recognize that that window is going to down to, let's say there's 100 things that we're looking at. You really probably only are going to find one or two that really, really are going to move the needle. And it's a small percentage, and you need to be that aggressive and that portfolio minded of what is that continuous return on value or investment. The thing that's happened over the past 2 years, I would say, is now we have open channels to bring industry in. My favorite is the Greenhouse Initiative, which actually partners early stage companies. These are probably pre-Series A with medical centers. So these are clinicians, these are administrators, and sometimes patients on the co-design and development, the advancement of that solution. One that actually just got FDA clearance and went to market is rolling parallel bars. So if you're in a hospital, you know that you're requiring physical therapy, we generally bring you to the gym. This company, with the help of the VA, actually co-designed a portable and compacted parallel bars that completely reconfigures out, and you can just do that in the hall or in the patient's room and go to the next. Stable enough, sturdy enough to fit a wheelchair. So they kind of went through all the different iterations. So that's, I think, the long short of, you have to have multiple on-ramps, you have to have a lot of exit ramps, but you have to have a purposefully constructed ecosystem that enables external and internal to work together, that brings diverse minds together. You need engineers and physicians and nurses, informaticists. They all need to be at the table because their perspective gets a better solution out there. And then you need to create a market, because without it, you just have everyone's pet project floating around, and that's not valuable.
If you're able to scale those sort of things like that within the VA, let me go to the next one. How do we get those ideas out? Obviously, yes, there's a great publication, some guidance, and the rest of it. We've got sitting here with us somebody who cares a lot about what employers think, somebody else who cares a lot about substance abuse. I think employers might care about substance abuse and mental health, and I understand that may be an issue in the VA too, possibly. So but I don't know if that's an area to go to, but given the expertise we have around here, I wonder if there are things that have been learned in that area in the VA or they're coming to the VA from outside, and that we might be able to think about to scale around that particular problem. Is there, I know, if you thought about that, or JL, you've seen some stuff on that area?
In terms of, well, the first thing I'd say is what I was trying to jump in before is that Smart Heart program. The technology company that is powering that is a company called Moving Analytics. That was Blueprint Health Class 7. That's Harsh Vatsagnam and Ade Adesanya, two good friends of mine. I'm a shareholder in the company, and I am very happy to hear that it is working well for you. So that is great. And I will text them.
Rates. Let's get them somewhere.
I'm going to text them when I get off the line to tell them that I'm hearing great things about Moving Analytics and what they're doing. So I'm very happy about that. Matthew, what was the question about?
I mean, maybe that's the way, right? So they were a little bit outside, they were a startup. They have some other, I know I've chatted with them a bit. They've had some other work with health plans. Get into the VA, get a big contract. How do we get, I assume a lot of stuff happened within the VA to change the program, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure, Brian, there's been a ton of work done on that, scaling with the VA. How do we get stuff like that, and whether it's that or other approaches? I was going to guess there might be something in substance abuse, out of the VA that can become more formally recognized and scale across all these areas we need, because essentially we, the taxpayer, paid to develop this kind of thing. How do we get more of it?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways we've started to tackle this. The last example I'll give is where I think we're heading, but one thing we've done is we actually have a marketplace that's now publicly available. It's marketplace.va.gov, I believe. And that is actually something that people can go on and search and look at a repository by across the country, so by region, of practices that have been vetted and implemented at VA medical centers. So you can sort of prioritize and say, like, I'm looking for a solution that VA has scaled around mental health. And what you'll find is sort of the ability to connect with the people that started the program. You see a full package, materials that people can download, they can pull, they can see how long it generally takes a hospital to implement. So we really tried to be creative about how can we get this information out to the greater public so that people can take advantage of the amazing work that's going on while simultaneously enabling our own system to learn from one another.
So I'm going to ask you precisely about that. So that's great. You put this thing out there. A lot of times, and Jen, this is a problem I know that you're, I'm sure, working on combating. And, you know, JL, when we were doing this at Health 2.0, we had the same issue the whole time. And Jen Benz, you must have this with every employer. You put all this great stuff up there and people go off and people are doing whatever they're doing in their own day job. They're not looking outside for this stuff or not, or they're inventing it in their own, you know, I'll pick on Kaiser because they do this all the time. They invented their own stuff and they keep something invented here and reinvented here. And we never get it there. But surely, if you're one of America's leading health plans or one of the big hospital systems and you're trying to implement a program like this, you should be going and stealing this stuff pretty much straight away. How are you encouraging that level of interaction where this stuff gets shared and really gets adopted?
Yeah, that's the next thing, sort of the latter piece of this.
Yeah.
You've seen, I hope, and I'm happy to talk about the number of partnerships, a very purposeful and strategic collaboration with industry now, because we believe it's going to take not only interagency governance, FDA, HHS, big partnerships coming together and moving the industry. I'm confident that VA is a national leader, if not a global leader, in the utilization of point of care manufacturing. Hospitals actually now producing, designing, and manufacturing custom surgical implants and solutions. We actually just got FDA clearance on oral maxillofacial cutting guides that we designed are going to be producing in the walls of VA hospitals. They're patient specific, they're matched. I think first hospital in America that is, I've got a class 2 device utilizing 3D printed cleared. So we educate people that are doing this, we help bring it together, but we need industry and unconventional partners sometimes to come together to help co-design these solutions. The reason why is they understand the commercial marketplace. They understand how can we bring a solution to market that's actually going to help move the commercial landscape and utilize some of the resources we have in VA to co-design those solutions to make them more patient-centric or physician-centric. And so that's, I think, the next step here, because that's how I see us actually influencing healthcare innovation more globally.
And to jump in there, Ryan, I think a very important point, going back to moving analytics and Smart Heart, the technology that they used to begin with, actually even before they put a technology into a device, was a Stanford protocol for cardiac rehab. Essentially, they took that protocol, they became exclusive licensees of that protocol and built the technology around it, and that's what they've been marketing. And I have always argued, I get a lot of entrepreneurs coming to me like, give me an idea to do a startup. And what I always say is go to a place that has exposed IP, where they really can't do a lot with it because, they're academics or they're government people, but they clearly have something that other people value. And I'm sure if you look throughout the VA system, there's probably an opioid detoxification program for older veterans, right? I guarantee that exists. And I can imagine, just exposing that to the world, saying these are our standard standard licensing terms. And this is the way we, give entrepreneurs access to this technology. And then just encourage people to come in, and you'll find people like Harsh and Ade who will be like, I think this is a big market. I think we can raise a lot of money around this, and I think we can help a lot of people in the meantime. So I really applaud what you're doing. And again, in this One Blueprint company, we've seen the success of that approach, and I think you can see a lot more of that, as opposed to, entrepreneurs like randomly inventing things in their head that they think are interesting problems that are really like coastal elite problems or young men's interesting problems.
Right.
I think what you're doing at the VA, these are big problems that affect very large populations, and there's businesses to be built there.
You're discussing the happy ring people who got funded, got $60 million yesterday for putting a ring that measures whether you're happy or not.
That's and by the way, that's the Tinder founder. So the old one of the Tinder, yes. So Matt Hurd, Sean Hurd, or whatever his name is, he raised $60 million for a mood ring. Come on, man.
I mean, can't you just get that at the grocery store in the vending machine?
I thought so, right? It was like yellow means you're happy, right?
Yeah.
Jen, I want to hear from you, because listening to this, right? If we were full of analogies today, Ryan, you had a great one about sports. Now you think about, how does a fire spread, right? And I think you can look at these pockets, and VA is certainly one. And JL, you mentioned the open IP, particularly at academic medical centers, absolutely, and they're solving real problems, right? So we have that. Then we think about the sort of very intentional, very strategic entrepreneur who can come in and take that. They make the jump, but it has to land somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't land somewhere that's let's over-egg the analogy for a second, a sort of, dry environment that provides fuel, it's not going to happen. And so I think about, including with moving analytics, like how are we going to pay for these things? But Jen, you think about this all the time, and I'm really curious to hear from you on that, because that receptive environment, in my opinion, is the bottleneck.
Yeah, well, what I keep thinking of is a couple months ago, we were having a conversation on this talk, and I think JL, you were part of that. And we were talking about how long it takes for a single innovation to make its way all the way through the healthcare world, and it can be a decade or more to get even some somewhat basic changes in protocols really disseminated everywhere. And so what I keep thinking about is, if the VA has a model for speeding that up, where do employers put pressure on the provider systems and the hospitals and so forth to be adopting those? And that's one of the things that's a big topic right now, is employers kind of flexing their weight to push the needle on health equity. Well, they can push in any area that makes sense, but I think there's not always clarity on what's the top priority. And there's of course a huge focus on quality of care and outcomes, and we know that there are vast differences in the quality of care even within the same geography. And so that's been a big focus, but I just think it seems like there's so many more opportunities to push that along faster if we can figure out the right levers.
But Jen, is the problem, I mean, we've had a lot of discussion, right, which is that you mentioned employers so diverse, right? And half the employers if I've seen 15 pitches, I've seen at least 15 pitches, presumably, for people with some kind of fertility play, which is purely aimed at the kind of the Googles, and keep their 30 plus women in the seats as long as they can, a bunch of others, and you're going, is that? I mean, I'm speaking as the guy who's got 2 children who drive him crazy. is that the problem we're really trying to solve in healthcare? But that's kind of the stuff that's getting funded, and there are employers who are going down that path. I don't see, the issue that Ryan has is he's got a fixed budget, right? And at some point, I know we don't care about deficits and government spending anymore, but one day we'll get back to caring about that stuff. And the point about a VA or a UK NHS or even a Kaiser, so that's kind of a fixed budget, and can we innovate around the fixed budget? And I don't know, do we have enough? I mean, are employers with the high rates of vacancies and the low rates of unemployment now desperate enough to be pushing for, what happened back in the early 90s when they said we can't afford it anymore, or go into this managed care thing? Are we coming close to that? Where are we?
Well, we come back to this every 6 months or so, and it's just hard because employers do not exist to modify the healthcare or to change the healthcare system. But by accident, they are the largest purchaser in the healthcare system. And so it really just depends on each industry and individual company where they're going to flex. And we see a lot of pressure on employers right now around racial equity and proving that they actually are going to do what they say they're going to do on their diversity and inclusion commitments that everyone made in 2020. So that might be the area that makes the most sense for them to push on and say, hey, we're really going to put our money where our mouth is when it comes to health equity and the way we're purchasing healthcare, aligning that with our DE&I values. But that might change to something else in a few years. And, Matthew, to what you were saying, it's not always the sexiest ideas that matter the most in healthcare. And I talk to a lot of startup founders who are looking at digital health solutions that are really only created for the top 20 high-tech companies. And that's not the whole US workforce. We have to look at the stuff that really serves the interests of low-wage workers and people who are in rural areas and so forth. And looking at what Walmart is doing with their healthcare benefits is always interesting because they have that hugely vast population all over the country, and in places that they might be the only large business that exists, and they're certainly not a hospital for miles and miles.
Yeah, I would say there are innovations for the rest of it. You've seen that company Homeward and Uncle Hopscotch funded just doing, primary care and mobile vans and clinics in rural areas and stuff. I bet you, as JL said earlier, Ryan, I'm sure there's probably a bunch of mobile vans and rural area clinics in the VA that we don't hear much about that, are dealing with veterans who are out in rural places as well. But I mean, I know that's a problem. My concern, and I'm probably beating a dead horse here, is that we don't see the real, pressure being put on the healthcare system by employers that you can see in these closed budgeted systems like a VA or Canada or the UK or whatever. And that's, that leads to why do I need to get my cardiac rehab down the cheaper and better and faster if the for an employer, when they don't really care and they really want to buy a more high level, fertility benefit or diet thing, whatever they're buying, which is a lot less intrinsic to healthcare. And that to me is always a problem. And that's why you get such diversity in digital health companies and others going to employers thinking of all these different programs, because some of them do very well out of these other things. Anyway.
Well, but isn't that part of the problem too? And Jen, I'm really curious to hear from you. Like, here I am, I'm going to solve this one tiny carve out for this slither of your workforce. And here I am, and I have tens of millions of dollars in my bank account, so I must be excellent. And I think, at what point as well, and, I think this takes us back to a little bit to where we started about Amazon Care, which is, it seems to me, and Jen, you'll know better than anyone, that employers might be tiring of this. Like, I think the biggest disaster we've seen in digital, and the biggest shame, although, we're seeing mergers and all these sorts of things, is everything's a point solution. It's a single point solution, and whole care, holistic care is actually what's going to work, right? Why is primary care hard? Because you're the intake for everything. Like, we shouldn't be shocked at this. But I mean,
the proliferation of all those point solutions makes the engagement in any one of those solutions more difficult. So you kind of have this vicious cycle of, we want more point solutions because we have all of these niche needs, but then we put all of these point solutions in and people get overwhelmed by the solutions, and then they don't know which one to choose. And then, then there's another issue that comes up. So we put in more point solutions, and now, that cycle kind of continues. And one of our, the companies we work with, one of their biggest struggles right now is, why am I not getting engagement in all of these things that we know our people need? And, there are so many different reasons, but you really can't communicate. You can't look at just the communication. You can't look at just the solutions. It's so complex to get people to do things that really change their health behaviors. So that's a big challenge for employers, is just getting people engaged in the basics. And then, they don't have a lot of time left over to then reform everything else in the healthcare system too.
Yeah. One of the things that we always sort of lament, and this is just, we're never going to get past this, I think, until there's some upheaval, but we're approaching healthcare challenges and saying we're going to solve these with technological solutions, right? I mean, what streaming did for home entertainment and renting movies, and what Amazon did for supply chain, we're taking that mentality and believing that we're going to somehow apply that same principle to changing healthcare, right? Look, if I'm having a heart attack, okay, I don't care how much the angiography or the stent costs, right? I don't need to see the quality menu. You get me to a hospital as fast as you can and fix this, right? So in those specific parameters, the laws of economics are a little bit bent, okay? I'm not acting as a rational buyer. But the other thing too is that the actual consumer, right, the patient, is not actually the consumer. They're not the purchaser. And so their ability to really influence products and solutions created in a way that are meaningful to them is actually quite limited. And so I think we're trying to technologically solve our way out of some really, really profound challenges, such as, the fact that your zip code tells you a lot about your health outcome, not actually where you get healthcare. And so we need to solve those problems. And yes, technology can help. But imagine if all the money going into AI right now actually went into artificial intelligence solutions that made clinicians and administrators' lives easier. It focused only on reducing the administrative burden in healthcare, not on all these sepsis algorithms, all these tools that half of them, never materialize. You would actually see healthcare get a lot more efficient. And efficiency leads to cost reduction. And then that cost reduction can be passed back on to the employers and the consumers in the form of lower premiums or lower out-of-pocket expenses. So I think it's just a misguided application of technology to the wrong problem.
Right. Somebody has to say something that not depresses me before we close. Because, but that's a. I see that, but I mean, on the other hand, you're going to have that level of innovation. You're going to have a level of diffusion of ways to use technology. When you have any kind of innovation ecosystem marketplace, it's just going to happen. Some of it's going to fail. So I agree that, there are lots of things we could do and we could spend our money more wisely. But as you mentioned, Ryan, we have a healthcare system that has a lot of incentives in the wrong place. And let's face it, if you sat down to rationally design what the healthcare system would look like, you would not come up with America's healthcare system. We all know that's the case. So any aspect of it probably, so that's that. Anyway, all right, we're right at the end of our time. We're just going to go around and have a couple of closing remarks. What are people looking at, thinking about, and what are they going to be doing next? I'll start with you, Jen Benz.
The big focus right now is just on helping all of our clients get through the big changes that they're going to introduce this fall. I think it's going to be interesting to see where things land on the cost side. Of course, we had a flat year with COVID, and now a big increase with healthcare spend. So that's what I'm going to have my eye on the next few weeks, as well as getting a little bit of pool time in for end of summer. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. JL.
So although I went to Columbia, I'm still very much a big time college football fan. So my adopted team, because I was conceived at Fort Polk, Louisiana, when my dad was in the service, is LSU. So I'm still not sold on Brian Kelly, but go Tigers for this year. And what I'm looking forward to is, now that the Inflation Reduction Act has been passed, I'm very interested to see how quickly Medicare starts moving in terms of negotiation on drug prices and other things like that. And again, it seems like Biden is on an incredible roll. The Biden administration is on an incredible roll. And, let's see what they do in terms of Medicare and drug prices and how that may play out in the near term.
Fantastic. Ryan, you want some passing words for us? What you're working on? What you're thinking about coming next?
Yeah, sure. I would say stay tuned. We have quite a big announcement, hopefully in the next month, as we formally launch VA Ventures. So hopefully I interest people to stay tuned at what VA is doing in the innovation front. And then it's almost fall, so it's college football and football season. So that'll be most of my focus.
I'm actually going to a game next week because Stanford to play the mighty Colgate University. Colgate College.
Oh my God!
They thought they better go W on the schedule.
Colgate, my God!
I no idea why they showed up, but I guess now USC and UCLA have left the Pac-10. They need to sort of schedule somehow. I don't know. I think USC's nearest game is like 1,600 miles away or something now. Anyway, Jen, tell us what Dime is doing now and what you're going to be doing with the VA and what we can expect from you next.
We're just going to keep going. I think one of the themes from today is these easy wins, these fast returns are going to be challenging. And I think one of the roles that we take really seriously at Dime that we have in the market is to try and keep people positive and keep going. And so, Matthew, you said, God, this is depressing. And, Ryan, you're exactly right. We're not going to tech our way out of this. We are facing some real challenges. But are there new and exciting digital tools in the toolbox? Are there passionate innovators who are coming to healthcare for the first time with determination and with vision? I'm excited about that, right? Not everything is going to pan out. We've got to move away from these myriad point solutions. We've got to keep thinking that there's a shortcut. There's not. And that's why we're always going to be here. I think this is why the partnership with VA that we enjoy is so great. This is where I help the playbook can really help folks. That is that resource that says, let's stop thinking about shiny objects again, with intent, we called them digital health solutions. There are actual solutions out there, and there are more to come. So for us, it's going to be that slow, that relentless push and regroup and push and regroup. And we work with fantastic organizations in industry, other government agencies, and we're just going to keep going. And then at some point, everyone's going to have to tell me about college football, because I obviously, if you can't tell, didn't grow up here, got really into proper football after a while, having like decided that I shouldn't just be angry with it the whole time for not being rugby. The idea that you have to stop, change teams, the coach has to tell you at every play what you actually are going to do is actually a remarkably enjoyable game. But I've lived a long and sad American existence as an Eagles fan, with just one shining moment in that whole dark time. So it will be a fall of drinking Yingling and despair on Sunday evenings, I think.
It's one more shining moment than some people ever get, you know.
That's right.
I'm watching the new, there's a new Hulu documentary about Ryan, the movie star and the guy from It's Sunny in Philadelphia, both whose names are gone, who bought Wrexham FC or AFC in the UK, which is their fifth-tier soccer club, which is fallen on hard times. And right now they just fired the coach, so I'll see what see what happens next. That's some, yeah, and one of those guys is a big-time Eagles fan as well.
That's right. It's Ryan Reynolds and some others. In my mind, it's just like Ted Lasso.
They need to find an American coach with an upbeat personality who, you know, is ready to get fired. The way that Ted Lasso was in his very first commercials when he was manager of Tottenham Hotspur for, I think, 4.5 minutes before they fired him. All right, with that weird deviation off into the world of American college football, pro football, and English fourth-tier soccer, that is the end. We'll have a discussion, Jen, about what the real name of the game is. Association football is what it's called, soccer. Well, I want to say thanks to my guests for this week. You've been listening to THCB Gang. We had JL Neptune from the island of Manhattan, Jen Benz from San Francisco, Jen Goldsack from some hot steamy part of Florida, and Ryan Vega with our guest from the VA somewhere in our nation's capital in DC, where they changed the name of the football team for good reasons. But what are they called now? Like Commanders, the
Commanders.
The Commanders. I can never remember. It's bad enough these digital health companies merging and changing their names, but now the football team's doing it. It's all too done. And that was it. This is Matthew Holt. I will be back next week in the post-Labor Day edition of THCB Gang. Thanks for watching. If you caught this live, or you're watching a video later, or you're catching us on the podcast. But thanks for your time and attention, and we'll be back next week. Hope you enjoyed the show.